The Bite Show is listener-supported at thebiteshow.com.
This is our first recording concerning that book.
Yes.
For those that might be listening but don't understand what alchemy is,
yes.
What is alchemy?
Well, alchemy is one of the branches of what we can call the esoteric arts, or if you prefer, the esoteric crafts. It is a very, very old craft. It dates back to, depending on who you study and who you consult, but it dates back to ancient Egypt and or ancient China. Oddly enough, both civilizations were deeply steeped in various alchemical traditions. It's interesting that if you go back to Egypt, the ancient Egyptian name for Egypt is Al-Chem, from which we get our word alchemy. So, in other words, there is a clear ancient provenance to this science, and I'm going to call it a science rather than a pseudoscience, as for reasons that will become clear as we proceed. But alchemy has as its goal, as its principal motivation, to take the materia prima, the prime matter, out of or down from heaven, so to speak,
yes,
and embody it in what's called the philosopher's stone, in a material, earthly form. Okay? And the goal of that operation, then, is to be able, in alchemical parlance, to transmute base metals such as tin or lead or nickel or something like that into gold. In other words, a literal transformation of one element into the other. Now, that's the meaning of the philosopher's stone in its most basic, prosaic sense, and that is the goal of alchemy in its most basic, prosaic sense. But when you study alchemical texts, the thing that you'll immediately notice, and I'm sure that you have because I know that you've read a lot of them yourself,
yes,
is that these texts are very, very carefully phrased so that they can bear a multitude of meanings. And, you know, we've discussed in the Cosmic War series my idea that many of these ancient texts are, in fact, deliberately constructed in this fashion so that several layers of meaning are all possible and plausible, and
yes,
that these texts are deliberately meant to convey several meanings. So, if we go beyond the prosaic meaning of the philosopher's stone, let's look at what they're actually saying. And I get into this in the philosopher's stone, in the book by that name. The first two chapters are actually devoted to a discussion of this subject. If you look at the materia prima, the prime matter, the way that alchemy views it is, in fact, very, very contemporary. It is eerily similar to certain models of the physical medium that you would find within modern physics. Because the materia prima, the prime matter in alchemy, is a transmutating medium itself. This is why it's able to affect the transmutation of base metals into gold, because in alchemical thinking, all matter comes ultimately from this materia prima. Okay? In other words, it's the prime matter itself, which is the ultimate philosopher's stone. It is the matter before matter, so to speak. Okay? And in the process of diversifying itself, then all creation emerges. And of course, this is a very, very ancient Egyptian way of looking at the whole process of creation itself. Now, if we look at this prime matter from the point of view of a modern physicist, because it exists prior to any differentiation, that means it has absolutely no distinguishing features within it. Okay? It is a literal nothing. A literal physical nothing.
Okay.
Because there cannot be any observation of anything in it, all right? It's once distinction begins to emerge that you begin to have physical somethings. So in other words, alchemy in a certain sense even is talking about a creation ex nihilo, but it's not a nothing in terms of a void. It's a nothing that's a something, but the something doesn't have any distinguishing characteristics. That's a tongue twister, but
it's kind of confusing.
It's kind of confusing, but if you stop and think about it, it makes sense. It's a nothing that's a something without any distinguishing characteristics. Okay, it's not a zero. It's not a mere void. It's a different kind of nothingness. It's the kind of nothingness that you would think of in connection to Eastern religions like Mahayana Buddhism and certain features of Hinduism and so on and so forth. But anyway, it is a transmutating medium. In other words, the very idea of the materia prima in alchemy creates information in the field, and that is a very, very modern physics concept. In fact, the Russian physicists during the Soviet era were the first physicists to start thinking along these lines and writing openly about it. So it's a very, very modern idea. So alchemy in that sense, then, is dealing with a science, as it were, a craft, to manipulate the fabric of space-time, which is exactly what we've been talking about all along.
Yes.
all of these different interviews that we've been having over the past 3 years. Okay,
Yeah.
So in other words, this is another aspect of this whole story. All right. Now let's look at a third layer of alchemy. There is a third meaning of the Philosopher's Stone and this idea of transmuting base metals into gold, because in some alchemical texts, that idea of transmutation of base metals into gold is a metaphor for the transmutation or the elevation of the human being himself. The idea that the human consciousness is transmuted from a base condition represented by the base metals into an elevated or illuminated consciousness that is illuminated precisely by a deep connection to that material prime matter, all right? So in other words, in that sense, alchemy is a science or a craft of social engineering.
Oh,
okay?
Yes.
So now let's look carefully. This is a very, very important point. Let's look very carefully at what we have, what alchemy is actually saying, and has been saying, for almost 2 to 3 millennia. If you look at what it's saying, it's telling you two very important things. Number one, it is a science of the deep manipulation of the physical medium directly, all right? And because of that, then, it is also a manipulation of the actual physical material creation in which we live and move and have our being, to use the words of Paul, all right?
Yeah.
But it's also telling you a second thing. The second thing it's telling you is that it is a deep, deep science of the manipulation of human consciousness, of social engineering, of human society. And the connection is, it's telling you that both of these things are coming out of a particular physics, a particular view of the physical medium itself. In other words, it's telling you that the science of creation or tinkering with a civilization is coming out of one and the same science that is manipulating the physical medium itself. So in other words, we're back to that idea that I've been outlining in all of my books and in some of these discussions that you and I have had. We're back to that idea that in very, very ancient times there was a tremendously unified science. We've discussed how in Babylon's banksters, how there is a deep, deep unification between physics and finance.
Yes.
And the two types of physics and financial systems. Well, all I'm saying now is let's go deeper and the idea of a financial system being either an open or a closed system reflects itself in the financial policies of a particular given state and how it organizes those policies. Does it create money debt-free as a direct instrument of the state, or does it turn to a financial monopoly, a private monopoly, to issue monetized debt, okay, which is a closed system? All right. What I'm now proposing is that we're going deeper and saying that the financial aspect of it is but one aspect of a much deeper science of social engineering, of if you will, a magical working that influences the way that societies are organized and how they think. All right?
Okay.
And in that respect, then, alchemy is the key, because it's telling you, once again, that there's a deep connection between a consciousness, a cultural consciousness, an ethos of a given culture or civilization, and the type of physics that it adopts. It's telling you that you can have an open system physics where you have a transmutative medium that can literally create information, that you have a physics that is capable of the direct manipulation of that medium on the one hand, and it's telling you on the other that the same techniques, the same science can be used to transmute humanity itself, to transmute the consciousness, to engineer the human being. Now, this is a crucially, vitally important point, because I believe it was sometime around the middle of our Cosmic War series I mentioned that there is a deep, deep connection between this type of physics of the medium and consciousness itself. And that's precisely what alchemy is telling you. Because in text after text after text, it will tell you that you cannot undertake the work, the philosophical work, which means to make the philosopher's stone into actual material embodiment. You cannot undertake that work without the alchemist himself, without the operator himself undergoing his own transmutation. In other words, his own consciousness has a role in the preparation of the philosopher's stone. Is this all making sense?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad. You sprang that on me out of nowhere.
The Bite Show is listener supported at thebiteshow.com.